Welcome to Homeward. I'm Jim Burns, and I have some good news for you today. Well, it's actually the title of today's podcast. Changing Your Thoughts Can Change Your Marriage. That's the title. And I believe that after reading my guest's book, Us in Mind, for the second time, that I'm even more convinced that we can have that kind of a relationship. We can have a great marriage. And to help us think about our marriage relationship is my very good friend, actually one of my favorite people on the planet. And I mean that, Ted Lowe. Ted is on staff with Family First. He is a speaker and he's a writer. And by the way, he's a great writer and he's a great speaker. Okay. And prior to coming on staff with Family First, he created something amazing called marriedpeople.org. And before that, Ted was the director of a little tiny church in Alpharetta, Georgia called North Point Church. It's actually a big church. He's the author of 3 books, Us in Mind, Your Best Us. And he co-authored another wonderful book with our good friend Doug Fields called How Your Church Can Build Marriages. He is married to the lovely Nancy, and they have 4 kids. And he and Nancy live in Cumming, Georgia. Plus, he's just one of the finest people I know. So, Ted, it's great to have you on the podcast. I mean that.
Jim, thank you. Thanks for having me, man.
Well, I tell you, I've been looking forward to it. In fact, when we're just started in this podcast, and so I forget what episode this is going to be, but it'll still be in the teens. And man, your name was on the top of my list, and we finally got you, so I'm excited about that. Hey, what do you think it takes to have a great marriage? That's a nebulous conversation, but you actually wrote on that, and you use those phrases. It's possible to have a great marriage. Some people aren't thinking they don't, but you say no. You can have a great marriage.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, there's lots of answers to that question, but I think one of the things I've been really excited about over the last few years, especially, is really backing up and asking, what are you thinking? Like, what's your thinking behind your actions and your attitudes? Because your actions and your attitudes, they're not your thoughts, but they are catapulted by your thoughts, right? And so I think a lot of times we just focus on actions and attitudes. And I think it's healthy to back up and go, what was I thinking before I said that, before I did that, and the way I'm viewing marriage?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you say that. I wrote the word early on in your book, mindset, that to have a good marriage, you need a good mindset. And I found that you found in your book that the happiest couples kind of have a pattern, if you would. It kind of emerged as you were thinking, and others have written on this. I thought you did it the best, but you said one person, the mindset to a great marriage would be that one person rated their spouse with more positivity than even the spouse rated themselves.
Right. There was a study that's fascinating to me, and they basically gave people a spousal report card and said, rank your spouse on characteristics like generosity and kindness and thoughtfulness. And at the end of the study, they said the ones that reported the highest level of marital satisfaction were the ones who ranked their spouse higher in every category. Now watch this part, than the person who ranked themselves. So if you ranked Kathy an 8 on patience and she did a 6, that's a sign of a great marriage. And then the neuroscience on this is fascinating, which that's something I'm kind of geeked out by, and I love that piece of it. They found that couples who reported the highest level of marital satisfaction, it was one study on couples that had been married an average of 21 years and reported being madly in love. How do you like those words?
Oh,
but 3 areas of the brain that had higher level of activity than most of us. And one of them was for area responsible for a thing called positive illusion. And that's the ability to focus on what you do like and not focus on what you don't.
Yeah.
So happy couples, their minds and even their brains are set up to love in a way, to think in a way that helps them to love in a way that doesn't push their spouse away, but actually draws them to them.
Well, let me ask you a question, and we'll use me and Kathy for this because she will listen to the podcast, and I don't want her to get too mad at me. But and it actually, this is not true about her. But let's say that to be honest, I gave her a 6 and me an 8 on patience. Okay, that's not the truth, but I'm doing that for the example. So what do you do when your spouse has faults and your spouse has issues? I mean, there's certain things. Kathy Burns, we've been married 50 years. We just celebrated our 50th. That's so cool. And she's amazing. But there's things about her that still bug me, and there's things about her that I'm probably better at, and there's a lot of things she's better than me. What do you do when they aren't as patient as you I mean, you can't fake it, can you?
Right. Here's the thing. And I think happy couples are doing this well. You're definitely going to be stronger in some areas than she
Mm,
is, and then vice versa. And so it's a matter of focus. What do you focus on? Like, are you
mm,
focusing
okay.
on what's going great? Are you focused that they're
Yeah.
10 minutes late? Are you focused that they're very present when they're with people? So I think that's the difference. It's not faking it. It's not like you don't have conversations, but at the same time, there's just so much to be said about just letting things go. And I don't know about you, Jim, but the longer I'm married, the less energy I have to fight about dumb things. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I tell couples all the time is don't let things that don't matter to your marriage.
Yeah. Oh, I
Like,
like that phrase. That's worth writing down. Say it again. Don't let
don't
things.
let things that don't matter to
Yeah.
your marriage. If possible, just let it go. Give them the grace that you're going to need in about 5 minutes.
I love that you said 5 minutes instead of 5 months or 5 years.
Yeah, yeah,
That's so true. Well, actually, this goes right along. You have a phrase, you and Nancy have a phrase. We know tragedy and this ain't it.
right,
That's pretty much what it means. But how do you guys use that? You'll both use those words sometimes. We
right.
know tragedy and this is not it. Or this ain't
Well,
it.
and I think most people listening, Jim, they probably do know some real tragedy and different layers. And for us, we definitely know tragedy. We lost some uh, close family members on my side of the family at 26 and 49 very suddenly, um, and it was devastating to me. Really was. And so we've known tragedy. We've known tragedy in a lot of different ways, and out of that pain, somehow that phrase got birthed. Like, we would catch ourselves making big deals about things that aren't big deals, and we would somewhere along the way, we know tragedy and this isn't it. If we're at the airport and there's a long line, surprise, surprise, in Atlanta airport,
There's always a long line in Atlanta. I'm
there's
bitter.
always,
I'm bitter when I go there.
oh, you should be. I mean, it's like, but just, let it go. But it's one of those times where we know tragedy and this
Yeah.
isn't it. One of the examples that I share is I had booked a hotel on the wrong night, and I showed up at the hotel and they were like, yeah, we have a room for tonight, but it's Saturday and you booked it for Sunday. That means the rate is double and you can't get your money back. And so I called Nancy and I was like, oh, and she's really good with money and me, not so much. And I called her and she said, you know what? We know tragedy and this ain't it. And
Mm,
what makes that even a bigger deal for her is because she is so good for money. Because what
yeah.
she could have said very easily is, hey, when you book a hotel, there's just a couple things you have to make sure of. And the date is one of
That's
them,
kind of
buddy.
important.
Great. Here I am trying to make all this work with these 4 kids, and you can't even look at a date. And if she had said that, nobody on the planet would have blamed her. But what
Right.
was beautiful about that is she used that moment as a point of connection versus
Yeah.
disconnection.
Yeah. Well, as I actually have great respect for her, and there's a couple of stories in your book. One is that. The other one was you said to her one time, you've been working like crazy, you'd been speaking like crazy, and you said, I'm feeling, just a little anxious or a little depressed. I'm not with it. Well, we all feel that way when
Mm.
we've been speaking or traveling or whatever. And she said, well, that makes sense.
That's
Something like that.
yep. She said that's understandable.
Yeah, right. And so that's how we want to respond to our spouses, and obviously sometimes we don't. And I love that you said you're kind of a neuro. What'd you call yourself? A neuro geek? A
I kind of
neuro?
geek out with
Yeah,
neuroscience. Yeah.
yeah, neuroscience geek. And really, there's a lot of great neuroscience in here, and
Mm.
that's really something that people are studying. We're learning more, and it helps
Mm.
marriages in a big way. I smiled at a part when you were talking about in your head. You actually there's a guy in your head named Fred. Okay. And
Right.
I never knew this about you. I know a lot of stuff about you, but I
Yeah.
never knew you had somebody in your head named Fred. That does rhyme,
Yeah.
but I'm not trying to make it rhyme.
Right.
Talk about Fred.
This has been, Jim, this portion of the book, because I asked 5 questions in the book,
Yes.
like, about your thinking. And the first one is, what do you think about yourself?
Mhm.
Because that radically impacts your relationship in so many ways. And this was the chapter that I would cut and paste, because I get really real about some struggle with anxiety and ADHD and different things. And I think we all of us, some degree or the other, we have an inner critic.
Mhm.
And we have some people say, is this inner critic? Some Christians will say, is it Satan? And I was like, he's at least a very highly compensated employee. So, but I think about this Fred in my head, And what is that voice in your head, and what are they saying about you? So let's say you're driving home from work today, and your friend says, wow, that meeting didn't go well. I hear there's going to be layoffs. I bet it's you. With that reeling around your head, you walk in the house, you see your spouse, and they're like, hey, how was your day? You're going to be at a different point at that point. So there's this thing throughout the book I talk about, or in this chapter, about what you think about yourself is a process. And there's actually been research about how to process our negative thoughts. It's been around for 30 years that nobody talks about.
Wow.
That's so simple. And so just start to challenge, how are you thinking about yourself? So I've had so many people talk to me about how that for them was the most important part of the
Yeah.
book.
No, that's right. And kind of going right along with it. You said in another part of your book, and I think this is an interesting question. It really made me ponder about my relationship with Kathy. And I love it when I'm reading a book, not for a podcast, but I personalize it. And that's what I did with both of your books. I personalized them. But you said, what character do you have your spouse playing? So not only do you have Fred in your head, or do we, and we all do that, but we also kind of put our spouse in a category, and they're a character too. They hopefully Nancy's, you don't call Nancy Fred, but
Right.
we do that, and I think we do that. I just go, well, she's always going to be late, or she's always going to do this.
Right. And I think the big question there is, what do you think about your spouse?
Yeah.
How are you characterizing them? Because our brain is always searching for pattern. It's always searching, and we think also in narrative. So if you declare that your wife one day, you go, she's manipulative, you will hang that banner on her, and you will look for times to say, oh, there it is. Oh, she called me for dinner. There it is. Or, he's always late, and maybe he is, maybe that's a poor example, or he's always messy. And you start to focus on those things. Once you declared something, a badge, that's a big deal. And so I encourage people, this is when you pull way back. And I love using Philippians 4:8, which starts with truth, and start looking what's true about them, what's noble, what's right about them. And when that's our posture toward them, it's not that we stop communicating, but you start, as Nancy Lowe says, it starts to eliminate the petty stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so good. I want to get one more question in before we take a quick break. How do you try to see the best in your spouse? You said, and you told a story, and it's a great story about a woman. Actually, it's not a great story for her. She lost her husband, but it kind of changed her mindset, and kind of gave a different perspective. Her name was Debbie Wilkins Braisden. I'd not heard of her, and I'd not heard of her book, but the title just absolutely cracked me up.
Right.
But how do you change that mindset?
Well, she talks about she lost her first husband suddenly, and she said, she would always see his clothes left on the floor,
Yeah.
and it would always frustrate her, and she would always get angry with him about it, and said she came home. I don't know if it was an accident, but it was really sudden. She comes in and she sees clothes, and she said she just hung on to him for a really long time because she thought, this is the last load of laundry I'm going to ever wash for this sweet man. And so when she remarried, and she posted a photo of this, it's so powerful. She said she walks in and she sees that her new husband has laid his clothes on the floor. And she said she stopped and she said, here's a man who came home from work, who quickly changed so he could go be with my sons. That's who I want to see. Wow. That's what I'm going to focus on. And I'm going to pick these clothes up with joy. And we're not saying that you don't have conversations about these things, but at the same thing, that's a thing that doesn't mattering to your marriage more than your person.
Yeah, that actually, it's a change of mindset. One of the things in reading your book, Us in Mind, and really how changing your thoughts can change your marriage is the title, subtitle. It really, a lot of it is mindset.
It is.
And I think sometimes we drift because we let our minds drift to, I am so bugged at the little things.
Right.
Sure. I mean, you got to deal with issues like adultery and addictions and abuse in a different way than clothes on the floor. And actually, you got to say, look at, pick up your clothes. I mean, that's fine.
Right.
But there are those moments, and this woman had this aha moment, and we need to have some aha moments too. Listen, we're going to take a quick break. Ted will be right back. Awesome. This is so helpful, and I knew that it would be. Ted is with us today. Ted Lowe. We're talking about changing your thoughts can change your marriage, and powerful stuff. You can learn more about Ted and his books and his ministry. The book we're talking about is Us in Mind. I love this book. Go get it right now. And it's all in our show notes, and how to connect with him. And also, he's an incredible communicator, so you could use him at something you're at. He should speak at your conference. Honestly, he's great. When we come back, we're going to talk about your spouse and emotions, and that's a biggie. Okay, we'll be right back. I'm Jim Burns. You're listening to Homeward.
I'm Erin Mashaw, and I want to invite you into an honest conversation about one of life's most awkward yet important topics, sex.
Conversations about sex can bring up all kinds of weird emotions, not the least of which is awkward. But that's not a reason to avoid the topic altogether.
So, if everybody's doing it, then what's the big deal?
Where do you go with your questions? There are lots of voices telling you who you are, how to dress, what to think, how to feel. So how do we know what to listen to? Who can we trust to guide us?
When we treat others with radical respect, we honor God, we make our lives and relationships better, and we reflect God's love to the world all around us.
Now, I know you might be thinking, what? I don't need guardrails. I have good intentions, but what if intention isn't enough?
And as you think about the path from where you are now to where you want to be, who are the friends that can help you get there?
You'll hear personal stories, helpful advice, and truth from the Bible about how to make wise choices when it comes to love, sex, and dating.
Imagine being able to look back on this stage of your life without regrets about the way you handled relationships. You're not going to get there by accident. You're going to have to decide in advance what guardrails to put in place to get to where you want to be.
Join us for a student's guide to sexual integrity.
Welcome back. My guest is Ted Lowe. We're talking about changing your thoughts can change your marriage. Ted, such good conversation today. Always good. And plus, I just kind of have a crush on your voice, okay? That Southern accent thing. That's real for you, though, because you are from the South.
Oh,
You're
Jim,
not faking that thing.
Jim, you don't know how far it's come, buddy. You have no idea how far it's come.
You're telling me when you were growing up in Alabama that it was...
Jim, I used to talk about like this, buddy. This is how it was.
That's the same way you do now, right? Oh, I'm just kidding. Okay. Anyway, I love that.
I see how it is. Yeah.
Hey, we had two twins. This is totally getting off the subject, but we had two twins who moved in my elementary school. I grew up in Anaheim, California, and they had these great Southern accents. And you know what? All the boys, we crushed on them, and we loved those accents to those twins. In your book, you say that empathy is a big deal. And what do you mean by it? You use the phrase "feel, don't fix," and I just said "ow" because I want to fix everything. But what empathy, when we're dealing with the emotions of our spouse, is a huge thing. And I love what you wrote on this.
Jim, for mine and Nancy's marriage, this by far been the most life-changing part of the book for us.
I sense that.
When I started working on the book, I kept seeing what all the neuroscience and the marriage research was saying on empathy, just the power of it. And I thought, wow, I've been doing this for 20 plus years. How have I missed how huge empathy was? And then it kind of hit me, well, you missed it because you're terrible at it. I think I have an empathetic heart. I don't think my actions come off as empathetic. In fact, I know that my natural tendency, and this is true for a lot of men, and it's also true for a lot of women. Nancy and I both call ourselves relational Bob the Builders. Can we fix it? Yes, we can. And so for what I finally realized was, and she told me one night, she said, I don't want you to fix this. I want you to feel this. And there's some research on this that says that when people are standing in an emotional puddle, what we try to do a lot of times is yank them out of the puddle with logic and fixing it. And what they really want us to do is step in the puddle. And, my thing is, why 4 wet feet's the answer to 2 wet feet makes no sense to me. But at the same time, when I'm empathetic with her, it just works. And it's not my tendency. So the two of the words that, and we mentioned it earlier, that have been the most life-changing for us is, that's understandable. Like instead of trying to fix each other, I try to encourage her, and I'd watch her be frustrated with my encouragement. When she comes in and the day's been hard at work, she doesn't want me to say, well, you know what? I'm sure you're doing a great job. I bet you they're so proud of you. I know it's hard right now, but it's going to get better. Instead of doing that, I said, that sounds really hard, and that's understandable. We use it all the time. When I was tired and exhausted, she said, "How you doing?" "Oh, I'm not doing so great." "Well, you know what? You've been gone a lot. That's understandable." So I feel like I didn't have to change anything. I wasn't doing anything wrong. It has been so powerful. And empathy is so much easier than the opposite. You can't talk someone out of their emotions. And when we try to do that, it creates so much tension that leaks on way past that moment. So just having empathy and just looking at your spouse, just eye contact. We're not looking at each other. Did you know, Jim, that research shows that eye contact with another person, when you're giving them eye contact, it creates empathy in your brain for them. So if they're excited, that's the other great part of empathy. This is not just about the tough stuff. This is about the good stuff. When we were, and I got so excited about this research, one study shows is how we celebrate with each other is more important and predictive of a strong relationship than how we fight. And so when something good happens to us, we want to tell somebody, and there's a neurological reason for that. The reason we do is all those feel-good chemicals in our brain and our body, when we share it again, it amplifies them. So you want to be the person that your person thinks of when something great happens. So if they share something fun, even if you don't understand why they think it's funny or you don't understand why it makes them happy, you just smile back. You just go, "That's great." You just look at them. "You're so adorable right now. I have no idea why that excites you, but I'm so glad that it does." And we did that when we were dating. We were champs at celebrating each other. So I think these are the things. Empathy is so much clearer, so much simpler than the opposite. And again, it's the passage: "Rejoice with those who rejoice and cry with those who cry." Don't fix me. I don't want you to fix this, Ted Lowe. I want you to feel it. And I think that's been so powerful for us.
It seems what I hear you saying, I say this a lot in marriage, when I'm speaking at a marriage conference, one of my big themes is communication is a learned trait.
Yeah.
So if somebody doesn't naturally go to empathy, if they didn't see empathy growing up from their parents or whatever, I mean, they don't mean to not show empathy. They just don't do it, or they're natural fixers. Bob, what did you call Bob the Builder? You called her Bob too. You need to call her Bobette the Builder.
She's Wendy. She's Wendy.
Wendy
Yeah.
the Builder.
Yeah.
Okay, that doesn't rhyme like Bob, so you might have
exactly.
Yeah, Barbara. I'm just
Barbara,
trying to.
That is better.
Anyway, but it's a learned trait, and so you're going to do 3 steps forward and 2 steps back sometimes, but you made some progress, and sometimes it's just it's you just have to say that's really hard, and I'm just so sorry.
Right.
When you want to go, "Hey, I got the answer right here. It's 3 little words.
Right.
And if you would have only done that," and you're right, that's what's hard.
Yeah.
So part of it for me is, you can't see this on our YouTube channel, but I've got this tongue here that has like bite marks on it, because there's times I've had to learn empathy, and I've had to learn to bite my tongue, sometimes even with Kathy, because I go, "You know what? Well, then just go buy a new phone." Okay. You keep saying it, whatever. And I just, boy, that's rough.
Yeah.
What do you do when you honestly do know the answer and it really would help them?
Right.
How do you guys do that? What do you do?
Well, I found that couples, and I include, of course, Nancy and I in this, couples only talk about important things typically in the middle of important things going wrong. They only talk about finances when they feel like the other one has spent too much money. They only talk about parenting when they think the other one's not done something great. They only talk about being late or not late when one is late. And your body and your brain is set up to lose at that point. Your frontal lobe is out to lunch. Your amygdala is going crazy. You're emotional. Your blood pressure's up. There's a time and place for advice. It's just not in the middle of it.
Yeah.
When you calm down later, say, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something."
Yeah.
And you approach them in a way that doesn't push them away. It's got a different tone to it. And the goal of those conversations is you want them to know you care more about them than the topic.
Yeah.
And that's where it's kind of like, if you've ever noticed, if you ever go away, just the two of you, all of a sudden you're talking about things because you're connected and you're not in the middle of the things. And I think that's why I love date nights and marriage retreats. It's because people are always amazed. Hey, we had a conversation about something and didn't get in a fight. It's because your body and your brain was set up to win. Right.
That's
and if you've prayed God into it, then, there's just so much that can happen.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And plus, you use the word amygdala. I just like that word. You
Yeah.
use that word a couple times in your book, and I went,
Yeah.
wow, he knows this
It's
stuff.
just,
And I just
yeah, it's just
amid,
for people listening. It's just your fight and flight. It's just
yeah,
your emotional part
right,
of your brain, and it's funny. The same part of your brain that's makes you grab your kid from stepping out into the road is the same part of your brain that gets triggered when your spouse triggers you.
yeah,
So
no,
the amygdala is just way too efficient for marriage. That's all I got to say.
yeah.
It's
New
just does
new
too
word of
good
the
a job.
this is the podcast word of the day.
Okay.
The Homeward with Jim Burns podcast word of the day, and anybody who knows how to spell it can send me a note. Hey, I want to ask you another question. It went right along with what you just said. I'm going to throw out 3 words. They're in
Okay.
your book, and I want you to kind of comment on them: fight, flight, or freeze.
Right. Fight is we typically have different reactions. Like I'm kind of sick and twisted, and I love videos of people getting scared. It just makes me. It's just so funny to me. And so you will watch people's personalities during the middle of this. Some people, if they get scared, they punch whatever it is that just scared them. Excuse me. They punch whatever it is that just scared them. Others will scream and take off running. That's flight. And the others will just freeze. They don't know what to do. We can do that relationship. So if you're knee-jerk reaction, and that's what we're talking about here. This is that thing that you didn't even think about before. If you're a fighter, then your spouse brings up something, you step toward that tension. Let's talk about it. For others, they're like, I'm out of here. I'm going to drive. I just need some space. And then there's some just absolutely stunned. And so I think it's helpful to go, where am I in that?
No, that's really good.
And you just kind of gauge that out.
No, it's good. I think it's really important that we identify how we do that,
Right.
so that we can improve upon the communication. I mean, we have only just touched the surface of your book called Us in Mind. By the way, if you're on our web, on our Homeward channel, this is up. Can you see it? Am I showing it? There you go. I can see Elijah. I'm throwing it. I love this book, by the way. It's a great book, and you'll get to read the book, read the word amygdala a few times. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, but also I actually did part of my PhD on brain stuff, and I still can't pronounce those words. But Ted, this has been amazing. Thank you. Great stuff. And by the way, if you want to learn more about Ted, you can go to our show notes. He really is a man of integrity, and he has great wisdom, and he's just one of my favorites. Hey, before you go, I want to give you a great principle that's really helped me in my marriage, and it goes right along. The whole time I was reading Ted's book, I was going, wow, this is probably one of the more powerful books I've read lately on this. And these 4 words are the powerful words that have helped us. Are you ready for the words? You can write it down if you want. Does it really matter? Honestly, those 4 words have changed my relationship with Kathy in a good way, and changed me more than changed my relationship with Kathy. I've learned that we can get so frustrated with our spouse, and frankly, most things don't matter. I mentioned earlier that, adultery does, addictions do, abuse. But you know what? Most people, when their marriages drift, it's the minor stuff that becomes big stuff. Right. Dr. Neil Clark Warren, who I've said many times has been a real mentor in my life. He's the founder of eharmony.com, but a marriage expert. He said to me one day in the lunchroom at eHarmony, I was doing some consulting for them. And he said, if I could give one gift to every couple on their wedding day, I'd wrap up a large box filled with adaptability, because no matter how good your relationship is, you will have to be flexible enough to change yourself and at least tolerate your partner's differences. So it's exactly what we are talking about. So what is it? Does it really matter? It's a mindset. What we learned today was, as Ted was talking, this is a mindset. Now, Kathy and I are very different from each other. We've talked about this before. I have a tendency to drive her crazy, and she has a tendency to drive me crazy. I mean, we have what we call a high maintenance marriage, but we actually write books together, and we do things and speak on this together. And yet we can drive each other crazy. And maybe that's the case with your spouse at times. I'm an extrovert. She's an introvert. She is detailed. I'm let's say less detailed. If she was with me, she might say responsible and less responsible, but she's not on this podcast. So there you go. I'm an eternal optimist, and that can drive her nuts. And she's a perpetual realist. That doesn't mean that she's all negative all the time, but she's a realist. Okay. Comes to money, comes to other issues, our kids, whatever. So I try to be on time. And Kathy, well, let's just say in the last 50 years of our marriage, since we've been married 50 years, I'm not convinced she's made it to church for the first worship song at the beginning anyway, more than like 2 times. Okay. So let me leave you with these 4 words, because this has changed my life. I mean, if she's an introvert, which I was drawn to at the beginning, now I have to say, if she's not like had a shallow conversation with everybody at the party, and I have, does it really matter? No, it really doesn't. Okay. And so again, take that with you and go out and get Ted's books. Learn more about Ted, because he's just an incredible human being and he has great stuff. And again, my thanks to Ted Lowe. Thanks to you for listening or watching on the Homeward YouTube channel. And I hope you'll subscribe to our growing number of people who are telling us that they really like this podcast. And if somebody needed to hear this, then send it on. And until next time, I'm Jim Burns, and I really appreciate you listening to Home.